GS, Super T, Super Adventure, Multi, V-Strom. These are well-known names in the adventure market. No one would have ever thought to put the king of the big twin, Harley, in that category, but they have made a place for themselves right in the middle of the pack with their new offering, the Pan America 1250. How did a cruiser company take the #1 spot for motorcycle sales in North America? Well, 9 content creators, including a couple of shorties like myself, were sent out to Zakar, Overland Park in the Mojave Desert, to put these bikes through the paces and find out. Bo here, Chaseontwowheels. This is part 2 of my trip out into the desert with Harley. So thanks to our friend Matt at Harley, we had the opportunity to ride the new-ish Pan America 1250 special around the desert in California. Not only did they invite us out for an epic day of riding, but also a day of training with the team at Zakar. If you haven't already seen it, we released a video of that experience, of which I'm sure there'll be a card or link or something. Today I want to focus on the bike, the specs, and how it actually felt to ride. Alright, before we get too far along, I want to thank, again, our buddies over at Revzilla. They got me squared away with some sweet gear. There'll be links in the description. The Sedici boots are probably the most comfortable motorcycle boots I have ever owned, full stop, and out of the box. They broke in well. I highly suggest these. Harley-Davidson, a brand known for its incremental, iterative implementation of improvements. That will mess your tongue up. Year model to year model, the status quo is what they're about. This has its benefits. Fit and finish is a strong suit. When you run a model for such a long period of time, you have a lot of room to perfect it. So when they announced not only a new engine, but an entirely new platform to put it in, the whole of the motorcycle world was totally skeptical. Harley riders weren't about it because it wasn't a screaming big twin tour. ADV riders laughed at it because what could a company like Harley-Davidson possibly know about ADV bikes? On several occasions during our 3-day stay, a singular thought kept crossing my mind. If they half-ass this, it won't have legs. The excitement will wear off, and it'll be an uphill battle. Well, after a day of some pretty serious ADV training, we took these things into their natural habitat. A nearly 200-mile trip into the absolute middle of nowhere. And it's pretty safe to say that everyone there was completely surprised at what these things were capable of. If you'd asked me at the beginning of the day, the story would have been completely different.
I really love this bike on the road. Again, that's my personal preference. If you were asking me, Bo, hey, if you bought this bike, what would you do with it? I'm going to be honest, I would probably make it more road and like light off-road duty. That's just personal preference though. And I'm sure with time, if I kept at it, I would get good as the instructors were on handling it. But right now, as it stands, if my money was on the table tomorrow, I'd be getting this and putting it into a more road-focused machine. Put some panniers on it, some maybe 80/20 tires, and doing some long hauls with some fire roads or, that.
I found myself about halfway through rethinking the bike in its entirety. This bike isn't new. There's loads of videos out there, and people have been putting more serious miles on it than us, but I went into this with some very tempered expectations. As a complete ADV novice, I wanted to approach this with a clean slate, and as I have no experience to compare it to, I had to just judge it as a motorcycle. The ride they had planned for us was mostly off-road with some good stretches of pavement, including a portion that used to be paved. The two biggest shockers to me were its motor and its suspension. So let's talk about this engine. The all-new Revolution Max 1250. It's a liquid-cooled 1252cc 60-degree V-twin, sporting dual overhead cams, variable valve timing, hydraulic valve adjusters, a whole bunch of new stuff. Most notable, the much tighter valve angles, allowing for a higher compression and more power. This, along with the rev limiter being set astronomically high for a Harley at 9,500 RPM, makes for a very torque-heavy but high-revving motor. Slightly less happy and too high of a gear than other V-twins, it still had that wonderful quality of being able to pull out of most conditions without bogging down. What was really surprising was how it was higher up in the revs. It never felt like it was wallowing out. All through the rev range, it just kept giving, a byproduct, I assume, of the variable valve timing. The tech included 8 ride modes: rain, road, sport, off-road, Off-Road Plus, and 3 customs, which changed things like throttle response, engine braking, traction control, ABS, suspension dampening, and with the help of the 6-axis IMU, cornering ABS, and cornering traction control. We spent a large portion of this trip in off-road mode, which has link braking front to rear ABS, and rear traction control. It softens up the suspension a bit. But when we came upon some nice smooth pavement, I threw it into sport mode, everything tightened up. Throttle response was dead on, no delay or that weird hesitation that the ride-by-wire has. It screamed through the gears, and thanks to the slipper clutch and the drag torque control, which basically is inverse traction control, it was buttery smooth, banging through all 6 gears, no matter what I threw at it. All of these settings are completely configurable through the massive 7-inch TFT display via some, albeit a bit mushy, well-organized switch controls. 150 horsepower and 94 foot-pounds of torque. It sits right up there with the GS and the KTM for its power numbers. Biggest takeaway for me was that this was the most optimized Harley engine I have ever experienced, and it felt more like its European competition than its American brethren. It felt happy and hungry at any RPM, and I could just not get enough of it. Power is great, but getting it to the ground and keeping it there is the most important. I mentioned how the ride modes adjust the damping for the front and rear suspension. This is possible from the semi-active suspension, courtesy of Showa. Among other things, the suspension automatically adjusts the preload to provide 30% sag regardless of the load. You can change this in the vehicle loading control from the menu, but it has an auto mode which does a pretty good job at kind of finding the magic. The other magic trick this preload adjustment works with is the adaptive ride height, my favorite, because I'm short. The bike automatically lowers by an inch or two depending on the preload. I really never detected it while I was riding and didn't notice it was working until I paid super close attention to it, which is exactly what you want a system like this to be. Unintrusive and seamless. It's supposed to also be helpful for short riders, but I do feel like it could have dropped a little bit more, especially at a stop. When we were riding, it really didn't matter, but getting on and off the bike was kind of a pain. Getting it off the kickstand while the ride height is lower was already a little bit sketchy. In this low position, you had to pull the bike past its balance point to the opposite side of the stand to get it to come up. The suspension was killer in all modes and did what each mode promised. Road and off-road mode, the ride was plush and really ate up any upset in the road. In the off-road plus and sport mode, it was super tight and feedback was crisp, clear, and predictable. The ride height thing, though, is a big one. I suspect that other manufacturers are going to implement something like this on their next offering, since most of them offer electronic suspension anyways. It's nice to see Harley leading the charge into what I hope is more accessible machines for us pint-sized riders. Along with the Showa suspension, they also bring an Öhlins steering damper. Big dual front rotors sport the Brembo tag, which is another standout. Most component suppliers are not clearly identified on Harleys, and in most cases are just adorned with their bar and shield. Big recognizable names on display, just so you know that it means business. A 19-inch front wheel, 17-inch rear, both cast, coming stock with the Michelin Scorcher Adventure tire. It's a tire meant for mostly road, some light off-road duty. There is an optional crossboat tubeless wheel, sporting a more off-road tread pattern. This is what we ran the entire time. I was worried about how it would perform on the street, but it never felt vague or washy, and we really pushed these things when we got to the road sections. All of these components were tested in a range of conditions to make sure they all performed well as a whole. The idea was that everything that you got worked in every situation. So, that's all great and not news, as there are a pantload of videos on the Pan America, including from the launch event at the very spot we were training. We put a good chunk of miles on the bike and in conditions that were more suited to its classification. It is an ADV bike. So what did I think of it? What I expected when I went out there was a Harley dressed up like a European ADV bike. What I got was a European ADV bike dressed up like a Harley, and that's a good thing. Not only is it competent, but it's also competitive. It's modern, it's innovative, it's engaging, it's planted, it's stable, it can be playful and a little scary. It is one of the best all-around motorcycles I've ridden in quite some time, and that was their goal. I spoke with a couple of the Harley reps at many times during this event. What they wanted was to find the balance. The balance between the GT and the Rally, between Multi and GS. It has all the comforts you want on a long trip: adaptive bank angle headlamp, heated grips, cruise control, adjustable windscreen, wind blocking handguards, a plush comfortable adjustable seat, and all the adventure kit you could ask for, with the special coming with a skid plate, toolless adjusting brake pedal, and then with a few mushy clicks of a button, a very potent off-road machine. The rest of the squad is putting out their videos. I'll leave you a link to their channels, but we were all in agreement. This experience was wholly unexpected and surprisingly impactful. They've made a remarkable ADV bike, but also just a simply great motorcycle in general. I think for a first attempt they killed it by coming out swinging and whole-assing it. They have now set themselves up to do what they do best: incremental, iterative implementations of improvements. Outro crew. Looks are subjective, I know, but I think the thing looks great, and it's polarizing. I love that they didn't follow the current trend, even though I personally like the duckbill look of these bikes. The tank and the head look very Harley. The only part I'm not a big fan of is the windscreen. It looks weird and blocky. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments. Put OC in your comment, because you know we love you the longest. Come here. What do you think about the way it looks?
I think it looks cool. I like all the way
I like
new
the
Harleys
headlight.
look.
I like that headlight, that square like headlight, like the Fat Boy.
Yeah, I like the orange. Bye. Still down here.